So, welcome to another episode. Today, we're going to challenge conventional thinking and breaking down one of the fundamental yet invisible forces that governs society. It's called the social contract. It's something we're born into. We follow its rules, pay its taxes, obey its laws. But here's the real question, or set of questions. Did we ever really agree to it? If we had a choice, would we opt in? And if society is built on an agreement between the people and those in power, what happens when the contract is broken? We'll cover some of the origins of the idea, the thinkers behind it, and importantly, or most importantly, what it means for your life, your choices, and your freedom. So let's start with a thought experiment. A world without the social contract. Imagine waking up tomorrow to a world with no government, no laws, no enforced rules. You can take what you want. There's no taxes, no police, no courts, just raw, unrestricted freedom. Sounds pretty good, right? But now imagine everyone else has the same freedom. Someone bigger and stronger than you can steal your food, or rob your house, or take your car. A neighbour burns down your house, and there's no fire department to stop it. There's no currency, there's no trade of value, there's no enforced agreements, and there is no security. If that's the case, then what would you do? It's pretty clear that you'd look to maybe form a group for your protection. Would you establish rules, maybe with your neighbours, and say, look, we're not going to do anything to each other, but if anyone comes, we'll work together? Do you trade favours to survive? Without laws or authority, trust collapses. And in time, we end up creating rules to prevent total chaos. That's the birth of the social contract. The agreement that says, I'll give up some freedoms in exchange for protection and some form of order. So, who are the thinkers behind the social contract and what were their perspectives on it? Firstly, and probably the most famous within the social contract, is Thomas Hobbes. He looks at the harsh reality, the fear-driven contract. He's famous for writing The Leviathan back in 1651 during a time of war and political upheaval. He witnessed firsthand what happens when society collapses. And according to Hobbes, actually, without rules, humans descend into violence. The only solution then is a strong, centralised power to enforce order. The social contract, in his view, is about fear. We give up freedoms because we're scared of what happens without them. Here's another thought experiment then. Imagine two people stranded on an island. One is stronger, the other is weaker. The strong one can take all the food, but instead they make a deal. I'll protect you if you help to gather resources. This fear-based contract is the foundation of many governments today, where power isn't shared equally, but people accept it because they fear instability. If you think about the series Lost, they were stranded on a desert island with no rules, And pretty quickly, a social contract was established with Jack at the helm. Obviously, he's a doctor, but he had the the most logical way of running their camp with regards to resources, water, tents, etc. And it's something that naturally occurs within a society to make it run as fairly as possible. Another of the thinkers was John Locke, ironically, the same name as one of the characters from Lost. And actually, to just go on a side note, they actually used a few philosophers' names, John Locke being one, and Jeremy Bentham being the other one. And John Locke actually turns into Jeremy Bentham, doesn't he? And I think it was a bit of an inside joke from the writers of Lost, but that's probably a separate conversation. John Locke had the liberal view, which is freedom with limits. He had a more optimistic take. He believed that the social contract should instead be mutual, where people give up some freedoms but retain some fundamental rights, such as life, liberty, and property. What was his big idea, though? He suggested that if a government breaks the contract by abusing power, people have a right to rebel. This thinking inspired the American Revolution and modern democracy. And actually, countries such as France that are always uprising, I would probably say fall in line with this view. Another thought experiment. Imagine if a company that you work for suddenly changed your employment contract and cut your salary in half for no reason. You're still doing the same job, same hours. Would you accept it? No, you wouldn't. You'd renegotiate or you'd quit because you know the value of your time and your efforts. Locke argues that people should think the same way about governments. If the deal isn't fair, we must challenge it. And then you have Jean-Jacques Rousseau, the collective will. True freedom? Possibly, as they thought. Rousseau's take was radical. He believed that society corrupts people and that true people, or true freedom rather, only exists when laws align with the general will. What's best for everyone, not just a few elites. But here's the catch. What if the general will is forced upon you? If 99% of people agree on the law, but you don't, are you really free? If society shapes our desires, are we ever truly making independent choices? You'll see this currently. Rules are made, but we don't necessarily agree with some of them. Here's another thought experiment. Imagine you live in a perfect city. Zero crime, perfect healthcare, no poverty. But there's one rule. No one can leave. Are you free then? Or are you a prisoner in paradise? So, what's the social contract in everyday life? Government and law. We pay taxes, we obey law, we follow rules because we believe we get something in return for them. Infrastructure, healthcare, safety. But what happens when the government doesn't fulfill its side of the contracts? The revolutions, as I said, the French, the American, Arab Springs. Maybe you get civil disobedience. Gandhi, Martin Luther King. When people feel the contract is broken, rejection happens because they essentially are rejecting the system. Maybe it's business and work contracts. Every job is a contract. You give time, they give money. But what are the unspoken contracts? Companies expect loyalty, but do they offer job security really? Employees work overtime, but are they compensated fairly? When the deal feels unfair, people quit, unionize, or quit. What about social media and free speech? We agree to terms and conditions, but do we actually read them? Is censorship justified if it protects the majority? Are we trading privacy for inconvenience without realizing it? Like, we all agree with free speech that we should have it and that we should be able to say what we want. But on the flip side, if you've got kids and people are absolutely slaughtering them for whatever reason, let's say they've got a disability or they're not the best looking, etc. Do you want some rules to protect them? Other random comments or thoughts that have come to mind. Okay, speed limits. We all agree that speed limits are stupid and they can be stupid. But on the flip side, do you want everyone to just be able to drive as fast as they want, wherever they want, and go in and out? Now, a lot of the time, we think, okay, well, we should be able to speed, but other people aren't on our level. They can't drive properly. Is that really a fair way to think? So, are you living in a fair contract? Did you ever truly agree to the social contract, or were you just born into it? If you could rewrite the contract, what would you change? And I think that's a really important part about instigating change in the world. Okay, some of the contract is fair, some of it's not so fair. And if so, what are those parts of the contract? And how can we help to change those parts of the contract? At what point does obedience become submission? Most of us never question the system, we go along with it. But if the contract isn't fair, then why? Why do we stick with it? What if it's rigged? It's not just about laws and government, it's about your life, your job, your relationships, your society. Are you living in a fair deal? Or is it time to renegotiate your contract with the world? Think about it. What are you giving up freedom wise for some sort of benefit? Is there a better way of doing things? If you can think of one and instigate that change, that's when you become a legend.